which they have to abandon as lifeless, because the impressions they once absorbed do not penetrate into modern consciousness. This is the disturbing impression received today by the candidate for initiation. Thus there is something within us that is withdrawn from the sovereignty of the soul. I beg that you will take these words with all earnestness. For a characteristic of modern humanity is that something in our nature is withdrawn from the rule of the soul, something that is dead in contrast with the life of the organism that surrounds it. And by working upon this dead part, the Luciferic and Ahrimanic forces exert upon humanity a very great influence in a quite special way. While on the one hand we can acquire more and more freedom, the Luciferic and Ahrimanic forces insinuate themselves precisely into that part of the organism which has been withdrawn from the sovereignty of the soul. That is why so many people in modern times feel, and quite rightly say they feel, as if there were two souls dwelling within their breast, and as if one wanted to tear itself away from the other. Much of what we moderns find so baffling in our inner experience lies in what has just been said. The Holy Grail was and is nothing else than what can so nurture the living portion of the soul that it can become master of the dead part. Mont Salvat, the sanctuary of the Holy Grail, is the school in which one has to learn, for the sake of the living part of the human soul, something that there was naturally no need to learn in the Eastern and Egyptian mysteries. One needs to learn what has to be poured into the still living part of the soul in order to become master of the part of the physical body that has died, and the part of the soul that has become unconscious. Hence, in these secrets of the Grail, the Middle Ages saw something related to a repetition of the Greco-Latin period in the intellectual soul. For in the intellectual soul are rooted mostly those parts of the soul which are now forgotten and dead. Thus the secrets of the Grail referred to the permeation of the intellectual soul with new wisdom. When the initiate of the Middle Ages wanted to present in picture form what he had to learn in order to permeate with the new wisdom the part of his soul that had remained living, he spoke of the castle of the Holy Grail and of the new wisdom, which is in fact the Grail, that flows out from it. And when he wanted to indicate that which is hostile to this new wisdom, he pointed to another domain, the domain wherein dwelt all the beings and forces which had made it their task to gain access to the part of the body that had become dead, and to the part of the human soul that had become unconscious. This domain, into which were justly transferred, justly is here used in an esoteric sense, all the successors of the evil spiritual beings of earlier times who had preserved the worst forces of Oriental magic, not the best forces, which also had remained. The domain which was the most vicious and hostile to the Grail was Castle Mevile, the gathering place of all the forces which attack humans in this part of their bodies and souls, and have undergone a karmic fate such as has been indicated. Spiritual wisdom can be carried anywhere today, because we have reached a transition stage leading toward the sixth epoch, and these things are no longer tied to particular localities. But in the Middle Ages it had to be sought in certain definite places, as I have shown in my book titled The Spiritual Guidance of the Individual and of Humanity. Hence, when in earlier times it was said that one had to travel to a particular neighborhood in order to receive a certain teaching, this was not meant in any figurative sense. In our own time it must be said that wisdom has less of a local character, for we are living in a time of transition from life in space and time into more spiritual forms of time. Whereas it has been said that the castle of the Grail is situated in Western Europe, the stronghold of hostility to the Grail must be located in another place, a place where, on account of certain spiritual forces there, a person can have just as great and powerful and good an impression as he can have also of its opposite, through other forces, which have remained there to this present time, like an Akashic after-effect, from those opponents of the Grail of whom we have been speaking. For at that place one can speak of the very worst forces, and they are still perceptible in their after-effects. At one time, evil arts were practiced in that place, arts which penetrated right into the physical life and thence launched their assaults on the part of the human soul that had become unconscious, and on the portion of the human organism that had become dead. All this is closely connected with a figure who glimmers across from the Middle Ages as a legendary being, but is well known to anyone acquainted with the nature of the mysteries. A personality who was quite real in the middle of the Middle Ages, Klingsor, the Duke of Terra de Labor, a district we have to look for in what is now southern Calabria. From there were carried out the incursions of the enemy of the Grail, especially over to Sicily. Even as today, if we tread Sicilian soil and have clairvoyant sight, we are aware of the Akashic after-effects of the great Empedocles, still present in the atmosphere. So we can still perceive there the evil after-effects of Klingsor, who allied himself with his duchy of Terra de Labor across the Straits of Messina, with those enemies of the Grail who occupy the castle known in esotericism and in legend as Calo Babot. In the middle of the Middle Ages, Calo Babot in Sicily was the seat of the goddess called Iblis, the daughter of Eblis. Among all evil unions which have taken place within the earth's evolution between beings in whose souls there were esoteric forces, the one known to esotericism as the worst of all was between Klingsor and Iblis, the daughter of Eblis. Iblis, by her very name, is characterized as being related to Eblis, and in Mohammedan tradition, Eblis is the figure we call Lucifer. Iblis is a kind of feminine aspect of Eblis, the Mohammedan Lucifer, and with her the evil magician Klingsor united his own evil arts, through which in the Middle Ages he worked against the Grail. These things must needs find expression in pictures, but in pictures that correspond to realities. They cannot be expressed in abstract ideas. And the whole of the hostility to the Grail was enacted in that castle of Iblis, Calo Babot, whither the remarkable Queen Sibylla had fled with her son William in 1194, under the rulership of the Emperor Henry VI. Everything that was undertaken by a power hostile to the Grail, and whereby also Amfortas was wounded, is finally to be traced back to the alliance which Klingsor had contracted with the stronghold of Iblis, Calo Babot. All the mystery and suffering which we see embodied in the Grail legend through Amfortas is an expression of that pact. For this reason the soul must still be strongly armed, even today, when it comes into the neighborhood of those places from which can emanate all hostile influences related to the mysteries of the Grail and the advancing evolution of humanity. Viewed thus, we have on the one hand the kingdom of the Grail, and on the other the evil kingdom, Castle Marvile and all that came from the pact between Klingsor and Iblis playing into it. And here we can see expressed in a wonderfully dramatic form all that the most independent and innermost of the organs of the soul, the intellectual soul, has had to endure in face of attacks from without. In the fourth post-Atlantean period, this psychic principle was not yet as inward as it had to become in the fifth. It withdrew itself more from the life in the external world, which had prevailed in Greek and Roman times, back into human inwardness, and became freer, more independent. But on that account, for reasons already given, it was much more open to attack by all the powers than it had been in the Greco-Latin epoch. The whole of the change which had taken place in the intellectual soul is portrayed haltingly, in a legendary way, and yet it stands so dramatically before us in the antithesis between Montsalvat and Castle Merveille. We feel an echo of all the sufferings and all the conquests of the intellectual soul in the stories connected with the Holy Grail. All that had to be changed in the human soul in more recent times is revealed to him who has come to know the nature of the mysteries. In this connection, we need only consider a concrete case. We often find that persons who have not gone far enough into the matter will ask how a man such as Goethe can, on the one hand, bear within him certain secrets of the human soul, and on the other hand, be so often torn by passion, as he is found to be by those who read his biography, in a rather superficial way. In fact, there was in Goethe something that can be called, in a crude sense, a double nature. To a superficial view, the two sides can hardly be brought into harmony. On the one hand, there is the great high-minded soul, who could bring forth certain portions of the second part of Faust and gave expression to many deep secrets of human nature in the title The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily. And one would like to forget everything one knows from biographies of Goethe and pay homage only to the soul who was capable of such achievements. On the other side, there appears in Goethe, tormenting him and often causing him pangs of conscience, his other nature, quote, human, all too human, close quote, in many respects. In earlier times, the two human natures were not so widely separate in their development. They could not diverge in this way. A person with a biography comparable with Goethe's could not rise to such heights as are revealed in certain passages of the second part of Faust, or in the title The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily, and at the same time be so divided in his soul. That was not possible in earlier times. It has become possible only in later days, because there now exists in human nature something we have already spoken of, the part of the soul that has become unconscious, and the part of the organism that has died. The part that has remained alive can be so elevated and purified that the impulse which leads on to the title The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily can be nurtured there, while the other part may remain exposed to the attacks of the outer world. And because the forces described are able to make their abode there, circumstances may arise in which there is very little agreement with the higher ego of the person. It should be understood that the soul living in Goethe had once belonged to an Egyptian initiate, and had then lived in Greece as a sculptor and a disciple of philosophy. Then between this Greek incarnation and the one as Goethe, there comes an incarnation, probably only one, which I have not yet been able to find. If we keep this in mind, we can see how a soul who in former incarnations could rule us can be led downward, and then has to relinquish a part of total human nature, which then lies open to the influence of evil forces. That is what is mysterious and so hard to understand in a nature such as Goethe's. But by the same token, it brings to light many hidden aspects of the human soul in modern times. Everything brought about by the duality of human nature lays hold, in the first place, of the intellectual soul. And the intellectual soul divides into those two souls, whereof one can sink fairly deeply into matter, and the other can rise into the spiritual. Thus, in the Knights of King Arthur's Round Table, we are presented with a repetition of all that the candidate for initiation had in a certain sense to experience through the sentient soul. In all that was grouped around the Holy Grail, we are shown what can be experienced in modern times by the intellectual soul. Everything that we must now go through, so that we may make one part of our double nature strong enough to penetrate into the mysteries of the spiritual worlds in modern times, must be enacted in the consciousness soul. This is the new thing that has to be added. And that which has to be enacted in the consciousness soul is crystallized in the figure of Parsifal. All the legends connected with King Arthur and the Round Table represent the repetition of the experiences of earlier ages in the sentient soul. all the legends and narratives which are directly connected with the Holy Grail, apart from Parsifal, represent what the intellectual soul had to go through, and all that finds expression in the figure of Parsifal, this ideal of the later initiation, insofar as this later initiation is dependent on the consciousness soul, represents the forces which must especially be made our own through the consciousness soul. So the interaction of the three members of the soul in modern humanity is presented in a threefold legendary form. And just as we can discern deep secrets of the human soul in old legends, so can we now also sense in them deep secrets of the mysteries of the modern age. It is false to suggest that the nature of initiation has not changed since olden times, as though a present-day Westerner had to go through the same stages as did a person belonging either to the ancient or to the more modern East. Things are so that a characteristic belonging to an earlier epoch will persist into a later time for certain peoples. A much more important point is that the whole nature of modern initiation has a more inward character, makes greater demands on the innermost part of the human soul. But in a certain sense, it cannot directly approach the external part of human nature. Much more than in the old initiation, therefore, the external must be cleansed and purified through the strengthening of the inner, so that this inner part becomes lord over the outer. Asceticism and external training belong more to the character of the old initiation, a direct evolution of the soul itself, so that it develops strong forces in its inner being, belongs more to the nature of the newer initiation. And because external circumstances are such that only in the course of time will the lifeless elements of human nature be overcome, the elements which can so greatly disturb the initiate of today, we must say that in our time and on into the far future, there will still be many natures similar to that of Goethe, persons who with one part of their being rise up into the heights, while with the other part they are connected with the human all too human. Persons who in earlier incarnations showed no signs of these peculiarities, but on the contrary displayed a certain harmony between the outer and the inner, may enter fresh incarnations in which a deep disharmony can show itself between the external and the inner organization. Those who know the secrets of human incarnations will not feel confused in face of this disharmony, for in proportion as these things increase, the human faculty of judgment grows also, so that the old principle of authority comes to an end. Hence there will be an ever more insistent call to test the fruits of the mysteries. It would be more convenient to pay heed only to the external characteristics of those who have to teach, for then one would not need to ask whether the facts concerning them, what they have to say and teach and do in a spiritual sense, are in line with human understanding and impartial logic. The duality of human nature is not in the very least to be defended. On the contrary, we must insist in the strictest sense on the rule of the soul over externals. But it must still be said that the facts which have been indicated are absolutely true for modern evolution. For the after effects of Klingsor and Iblis are still always present, even though in another form. A special feature of our time is that these attacks from Klingsor and Iblis, as they gradually lay hold of people, are insinuating themselves into intellectual life, particularly the intellectual life that bears on education, with its popularization of modern science. Consider what people have been learning for quite a long time now, and what they think it right to instill into children. Consider what is accepted as the basis of modern education. All this should not be judged in accordance with the views of someone who, believing he is very clever, says he understands these things and knows they are entirely correct. No, all this should be judged in accordance with how it influences and fructifies the soul, and in terms of the impressions it produces on the soul. And when a person becomes cleverer and cleverer, in the sense in which it is fashionable to call people clever today, he develops in his soul certain forces, which in this incarnation may make him very well able to dominate the conversation in circles wedded to materialistic or monistic ideas. But then certain vital forces necessary for the human organism are worn away. And when such a person has taken into himself only these typical dregs of modern education, in his next incarnation he will lack the forces that are required for properly building up the human organism. The cleverer a person is, by the standards of the time we are now facing, and the closer his intellectual attunement to it, the more of an imbecile will he be in a later incarnation. For those categories and concepts which relate only to the sense-perceptible outer world and to the ideas which hold it together, these concepts set up in the soul a configuration which may be ever so fine intellectually, but lacks the force to work intensively on the brain and to make use of it, and to be unable, while in the physical body, to make use of the brain is to be an imbecile. If it were true, as the materialists maintain, that the brain does the thinking, then one could certainly give them some comfort. But this is as false as the assertion that the speech center has formed itself. It has acquired its form through human beings having learned to speak, and so the speech center is the result of speech. Similarly, all cerebral activity, even in the historical past, is the result of thinking, not the other way about. The brain is plastically molded through thinking. If only such thoughts are developed as are customary today, if the thoughts are not permeated by the wisdom of the Spirit, then the souls occupied with thinking only about material things will find in later incarnations that they are unable to use their brains properly. The forces of their brains will be too weak to lay hold of things. A soul which is occupied today merely with calculating debit and credit, let us say, or with the usages of commercial and industrial life, or absorbs only the ideas of materialistic science, is filling itself with mental pictures which in later incarnations gradually darken the consciousness, because the brain would be an unformed mass, as today in cases of softening of the brain, and so no longer capable of being seized by the forces of thinking. Hence, for anyone who looks into these deeper forces of human evolution, everything that can live in the soul must be permeated by a spiritual comprehension of the world. So in this modern time, human nature may still be twofold. The forces belonging in particular to the consciousness soul must be infused with inner spiritual knowledge. Man must overcome the two regions through which Parsifal went. He must overcome, quote, apathy and doubt, close quote, in his own soul. For if he were to carry apathy and doubt with him over to a later incarnation, he would not make a success of it. Man must come to have knowledge of the spiritual world. Only through the fact that life widens out in the human soul, the life called Selde by Wolfram von Eschenbach, the very life that pours out spiritual knowledge over the consciousness soul. Only by this means can human psychic development advance fruitfully from the fifth epoch onward into the sixth. These are among the fruits of the newer mysteries. They are the important and significant results which must be drawn from these mysteries, which are an after effect of the Grail mystery. But unlike all ancient mystery wisdom, they can be understood by the generality of people, for gradually the unconscious and dead forces of the soul and of the organism must be overcome through a strong permeation of the consciousness soul with spiritual knowledge, that is, with a knowledge that has been understood and grasped spiritually, not a knowledge built up on authority. Even such things as have been said in these lectures if a person takes into account all that modern knowledge and education are able to give, can, when they are heard, be thoroughly understood and grasped, though they can be discovered only by one who gets to know the mysteries through clairvoyant sight. And they should be most thoroughly grasped. Now, it may perhaps be true of many modern people who are striving to attain to higher worlds, that in the shape of their outer lives, something will still be visible of the human, all too human, or of his efforts to raise himself out of it. Yes, it may well be that the fool's motley is still discernible through the raiment of the spiritual, as with Parsifal. But that is not the point. What matters is that there should be present in the soul the impulse toward spiritual knowledge, spiritual understanding, that impulse which is inextinguishable in Parsifal, and brings him at last, in spite of everything, to the castle of the Holy Grail. In the whole picture drawn of Parsifal, if rightly understood, we can find all the different methods of training the consciousness soul which are necessary to evoke from it the right effects, so that the person can gain control of the forces which whirl in confusion and strive against one another in the intellectual soul. The more present-day individuals look into themselves and try to exercise honest self-knowledge, the more will they find how conflict is raging in their souls. It is a conflict within the intellectual soul. For self-knowledge is a harder thing than many people suppose, and it will indeed become more and more difficult. Someone tries to acquire self-knowledge, but even if he is able to discipline himself in many respects and to build up his character, he will very often notice at critical moments how in his innermost depths the most deeply hidden passions and forces are raging, and how they tear apart the domain of the intellectual soul. And how is it with moderns who devote themselves seriously to knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge? The difficulties of the inner life may perhaps never dawn on people who believe that real knowledge is to be found in external scientific work and its fruits. But anyone who takes the search for knowledge seriously and from worthy motives will be in a different situation once they look with real insight into their inner being. They seek in this or that field of knowledge, seek, and seek also in life to come to terms with the diverse aspects of human living. After searching for a while, they think they know something, and then they search further. And the more they search with the means normally available today, the more do they feel themselves torn into pieces, the more do they feel drawn into doubt. And people who, having acquired a present-day education, confess to themselves that in spite of all this education they really know nothing, are often just the people who strive most earnestly and worthily for spiritual knowledge. In truth, there can be no one with any depth of soul today who does not experience this gnawing doubt. And it is something they ought to be familiar with, for only then will they immerse themselves in that spiritual knowledge which is right for the consciousness soul, and must pour itself out into the intellectual soul in order to be master there. Hence we must try to penetrate with rational understanding into what is brought to the consciousness soul from out of esoteric knowledge. By this means we shall draw into our inner being such a self as will be a real Lord and Master there. And then, when we come to know the nature of the modern mysteries, we shall stand confronting ourselves. Anyone who approaches the mysteries today must feel that they are confronting themselves in such a way that they will strive after the virtues of Parsifal, while knowing that because of the modern conditions already described, and because they are people of modern times, they are in fact someone else also, the wounded Amfortas. People of our time carry within them this double nature, aspiring Parsifal, wounded Amfortas. That is what their self-knowledge must lead them to feel. Then from this recognition will flow the forces which out of duality must make a unity. and so should bring us a little further on in the course of evolution. In our intellectual soul, in the depths of our inner life, there must be a meeting between Amfortas, wounded in body and soul, and Parsifal, whose task is to cultivate the consciousness soul. And it is entirely true to say that in order to gain freedom for ourselves, we must go through the wounding of Amfortas and become acquainted with the Amfortas within ourselves, so that we may also come to know Parsifal. Just as it was right for Egyptian times that one should rise up into the spiritual worlds in order to know Isis, so is it right for our times to start with the spirituality, the spiritual nature of this world, and through it to rise into the higher spiritual worlds. A wish to deny the Amfortas nature is not a true characteristic of our time. It is because we moderns are so fond of surrounding ourselves with Maya that we want to deny Amfortas. How delightful it sounds when we hear it said, quote, humanity is always advancing, close quote. Yes, but this advance follows a very tortuous path. And in order to develop the forces of Parsifal in human nature, the Amfortas nature in us must be recognized. So, in this cycle of lectures, using legends from which I have tried to call forth pictures of deep processes of the soul, I have sought above all to lead your deeper premonitions, at least in some degree, toward the nature of the modern mysteries. Perhaps one day we shall have opportunity to speak in still clearer words, if that can be, of what the nature of the modern mysteries discloses concerning the dual nature which we bear within ourselves, concerning Amfortas and Parsifal. The end of Lecture 4. All these lectures were translated by Charles Davy. This was Collected Works, Volume 144 by Dr. Rudolf Steiner. The Mysteries of Initiation, from Isis to the Holy Grail, 4 lectures, given in Berlin between the 3rd and the 7th of February, 1913.
Organic and dairy-free. Woo!
Here we go.
At Sprouts, our shelves are filled with new, exciting, and delicious discoveries. This is that Sprouts feeling.
I'm Derek, and I'm 55 years old. And for years, I've been inactive due to knee pain. At my last checkup, I was told I need to get moving again. To help me prepare for my first 5K, my run club suggested I check out Roadrunner Sports. A fit expert took me to the perfect fit zone. Wow, the technology they used. The 3D foot scan, the treadmill analysis, it was awesome. With new shoes and custom insoles, I'm walking on clouds. No more knee pain. Now I'm back, living an active lifestyle.